What's up, guys? Back with a Mental Monday. I wanted to make this one a little more professional because I got a text actually from Gene Zanetti of Wrestling Mindset. And I read through it. I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. I have to share this. Of course, I asked his permission to share it. So, what Gene did was he took an old film of me. I was talking about how I had wrestlers wrestling in my head. This happened very frequently during my college and maybe right after post-college career. I would have these people wrestling in my head. I wouldn't tell them what to do. They would just wrestle. They didn't have faces. They weren't specific people. They were just bodies that were wrestling. And I've talked about that in a few different interviews. So he took the film of that and he basically put it in AI and said, hey, AI, I don't know if it was ChatGPT or where he put it. I don't think he told me. What is happening here? What's the idea? Or tell us what's happening from a neurological perspective. And so, I kind of know what happened in my head, but they have this freaking awesome breakdown of exactly what happened, from a neurological perspective. So John Smith's also mentioned here because I actually talked to John Smith. John Smith said he had the same thing happen to him when he was really locked in on technical stuff. So it says, what Ben Askren and John Smith described as high-level procedural imagery and sleep-based motor simulation, and it is directly related to procedural compulsive neural pattern you experience in Tetris or chess dreams. This is not a hallucination nor even creative daydream. It is a neurological phenomenon rooted in. Okay, so guys, you notice I'm going to put some text captions up here because there's a lot of big words and a lot of things here. And if I'm just saying them, you might not get them all. So I'm going to, right above me, we're going to post some text captions of what I'm actually saying, and then I'm going to stop and talk about it. So, number one, procedural memory rehearsal, non-volitional. The basal ganglia and motor complex continue to rehearse complex movement patterns during rest, including REM and light non-REM sleep. So I would just see these things all the time. I'm going to sleep, I see them. I'm sitting in class, I'm seeing them. I'm just seeing these guys wrestle all the time, right? Without me forcing them to do anything. And a lot of times it was when I was relaxing. I'm sitting at home on the couch, watching TV, cooking some dinner. People are just starting to wrestle. What these athletes describe, faceless wrestlers in a match, is essentially their subconscious motor system running high-speed simulations. So that is actually exactly what was happening. In the videos, I was talking about how I would come up with solutions based on what these people are doing. I would watch them wrestle and I would see something happen and say, oh shit, that guy's got something. I'm going to go try that at practice tomorrow. Now, sometimes they were dead ends. Sometimes they wouldn't work and they were garbage. But there were many times where whatever I saw in my head was like, oh, I need to go try that. And then I'd try it and it would literally work. It would be the solution to my problem. So it is a type of internal sparring stripped of emotional narrative and identity, focused purely on positioning, timing, and mechanical novelty. And that's one of the things when a lot of people think of visualization, they think of getting their hand raised, or they tie emotions and feelings to it. And mine was non-emotional. And actually, for a lot of wrestlers, I actually tell them they need to take the emotions out and think about just think about wrestling. I mean, think of Mitchell Messerich is probably case number one. There were so many times when, especially when he was younger and wasn't quite as good, we'd wrestle and I'd kick his butt and he'd get all mad. It's like, Mitchell, you're freaking 18. You're way smaller than me. If I want to kick your butt, I'm going to kick your butt. Think about the wrestling. Think about what's happening. Think about how to solve the problems that I'm presenting to you, right? Because a lot of times when I do a private lesson with a high-level athlete, maybe we'll do some technical stuff, but lots of times I'm just forcing them to figure out what I'm doing, right? I've seen something in the wrestling that I think is a vulnerability. I start exploiting the vulnerability, and it's on them to figure it out. The brilliant ones will figure it out, right? And not every time, sometimes, but then by the end of the lesson, I'll say, hey, have you noticed what I'm doing? Have you picked up on it yet? And so if they haven't picked on it, I'll notice, I'll say, a lot of times I'll say, do you realize how frustrating that was that I was doing that to you, And so sometimes I say, well, this is something you don't do well, but this is also a tactic you could use on your opponents, right? So I'm forcing them to problem solve through whatever I'm doing in the private lesson. So Mitchell would always get super emotional based on the result of what was happening. I would say, stop the emotion. Just think about the wrestling. Just think about what's happening, how to solve the problems. Okay. Number two, pattern completion and problem solving. These simulations allow the brain to resolve previously encountered dilemmas. God, that was number one for me. I would get frustrated about a position I was encountering a lot in practice. And, so in the beginning, it actually might have been me running the simulations voluntarily. I would try to force the guys to do whatever it is I was having problems with. say finishing a single leg, or it was a lot of the scramble positions, right? Because I was creating them. I couldn't go ask someone else for an answer because no one else had an answer because the things didn't exist yet, right? So I was essentially creating novel problems and then trying to solve the problems, right? So it was like, how do I finish this? And I would just think about it and think about it and think about it and think about it. And right, sometimes these wrestles would come up with the solution. It uses stored experiences, so things I already know in wrestling, and imagined variations, new things, to synthesize new techniques. This is freaking what happened. I was doing these things and I was creating new techniques. That's how they woke up and reflected on these dreams with genuine novel moves. It is not a kinesthetic, it is in a creative kinesthetic sense, not symbolic sense. So, yeah, I like literally I would get down with these like daydreams or whatever you want to call them, and I would, that boom, that's the solution. Wow, boom, right? Go do it in practice. All right, number 3, expert level motor chunking. With enough repetition, the brain chunks complex movements into recognizable neural patterns. This is something I've talked about in previous Mental Mondays. I talked to that brain scientist in Florida in August, September, when I was with Joe DeCina working on extreme balance. And I said, some people seem to process things really, really, really quickly in wrestling. Because in wrestling, it's not enough to know the move. It's not enough to know that I snap the head, I shoot the single leg, I run the corner, I do the shelf, right? You have to be able to execute those in a really, really, really quick fashion. And then obviously, certain times your opponent gives you a different reaction, and you're going to need to change up what you thought you were going to do into something else, right? And so I said, well, how come certain people process things so fast? And he said, basically, they've chunked these large things, right? So if you think about like the movement I just said, you would think, okay, I need to, right, if I'm breaking down every little part, I need to snap the head, I need to lower my level, I need to take a baby step, I need to penetrate my knee, I need to turn my body around the corner, I need to get my hand above the knee. You gotta see the point here. There's a lot of little steps there. And the experts have chunked that into like one step. The sheer sweep single, they don't have to break down the little parts. It's just one thing that flows together. And they're obviously doing all the things correctly as well. Okay. These can then be recombined or rearranged subconsciously, similar to how musicians hear new compositions in their head. When John Smith or Ben Askren described seeing these matches in dreams, they weren't visualizing so much as accessing a deeply embedded kinetic memory system, right? So what they're saying there is that we were taking things we already know. And one of the things I'm still obsessed with is like how the body works and how the body moves, because obviously in wrestling, you are limited to how the body moves. You can't do moves based on how the body doesn't move. Right? And then you say someone like, I coached a Peyton Mako, for example. His body moves in very unique movement patterns because of his flexibility and balance. So I have to create something, right? Keegan's a little bit the same. Mitchell's a little bit the same. So it's like, I need to, in my head, understand how their body moves and generally how bodies move in order to create correct movement patterns for the wrestling moves. And if the body can't move in that way, the wrestling move then, therefore, can't be done. The facelessness is a feature, not a bug. It represents pure movement intelligence free of psychological baggage. So again, I was obsessed with wrestling and the puzzle that is wrestling. Not even really at that point in time, like winning or losing. Like obviously I like to win rather than lose, of course. But like a lot of it was just figure out the wrestling puzzle. The puzzle that's in front of me, that's what I want to do. Not really worried about winning and losing. I mean, that's going to be a byproduct of my experience, but I want to figure out the puzzle. Okay, number 4. Why it stops after retirement. Once the motor cortex is no longer activated daily for this task, the brain reallocates its resources. The procedural memory decays or is pruned, and the spontaneous drawing dreams vanish. This is a healthy part of neuroplastic adaptation. So I in the video I talk about, hey, after my competitive career, this kind of went away. I think it's also like real adult life. For me, college was pretty easy. I didn't really take the most challenging classes, so I was able to put all of my mental power towards just wrestling, that's it. And then when I got, into real life, it was like I'm coaching, so I'm thinking about coaching the athletes, I'm fighting, I'm thinking about learning that skill, a lot of other adult things that you have to take care of. And then obviously eventually sometimes you have kids and academies, and so I can't put as much mental resources towards specifically wrestling, so it absolutely went away. All right, how this relates to you. Your experience, never mind, I'm going to skip that part. Final thought. What these wrestlers experienced is the procedural brain solving real problems through subconscious rehearsal. So my brain is wrestling while I'm not wrestling. You experience a similar loop with high pattern, mentally immersive tasks but you are dealing in abstract logic or rhythmic instead of body mechanics. In both cases, it's a sign of expertise and deep encoding, not dysfunction. So, golly, I found this so fascinating. I don't know if you guys are into this as I am. One of the other things I really push on my athletes on, and just kind of I would say the framework of AWA is that if we want wrestlers to be really, really elite as they get older, they're going to need to be almost obsessed with wrestling. We don't push them at a younger age because they're not thinking at high enough level. And so when they get really obsessed, number one, they can go to a lot of practices because of the way our system is set up. But number two, our practices are not super grinding. Once in a while, of course, it's wrestling, it's got to be tough. But I want kids to leave the practice somewhat energized and enthused about wrestling. I want them thinking about, hey, what happened? How do I solve that? So when they go home or they're driving home or they're sitting at home and ideally they're not scrolling through Snapchat or TikTok too much, that's probably ruining their brain function most likely, so hopefully not do that too much. They're thinking about the wrestling. Thinking about what happened. Thinking about how do I solve those problems that I encountered today. And they're obsessing over it. And because there is, I can make this video even longer, right? There is a lot of science behind if I do a single leg, that has a neural pattern in my brain, right? It's running a single leg. Just if I was scooping a soup to my lips, right? I'm eating soup. I've done that so many times, I don't have to think about eating the soup, right? I could very easily visualize what it looks like for my hand to scoop soup out of a bowl and eat it. I could also very easily visualize what it feels like to shoot a single leg, right? Not what it looks like, but what it feels like. And so there's a lot of science behind running those neural patterns in your head, just thinking about it, right? Which would be the level below visualization that I was talking about. But just thinking about it is actually going to cause you to get better at that skill. So if I have a kid that goes home and while they're home they're still thinking about the wrestling, it's going to be hugely beneficial. And then, the other thing that ties into this, that I actually struggle with this as a coach. So, and I was listening to a really good book, a different really good book last week. What is it? I can't remember right now. I'm blanking on the name. Same guy that wrote The Rise of Superman, another book along with the lines with Peak Performance. And anyway, so in practice, especially the younger kids, they're not very good at any of the skills that we're doing. So, getting repetition is, I think, the most important thing, right? It's very important to get them better at the skill. But if you do too much repetition, then it becomes a certain amount of boredom, right? They think they know it even if they don't, and just doing the same thing over and over and over is kind of boring. And so the book I was listening to was talking about peak performance, and one of the things it said, you obviously need to have a level of motivation to put in the time, effort, and thought to become elite at something. And it said one of the main drivers of this is curiosity, right? So you go back to everything I just read to you. That was my curiosity to solve the puzzle that is wrestling. Now, wrestling is a never-ending puzzle because it's always going to evolve, right? I don't know how many new moves there are since I finished college wrestling. That was 18 years ago now. I'm getting old, right? There's so many new moves. So, but if I'm curious about it, that's going to be a main driver of motivation because I'm going to think of how do I finish this? How do I solve this puzzle? We've all had that experience where, we start doing a 1,000-piece puzzle. You start doing it, you're like, this is dumb. Why am I doing this, right? And then you get about halfway done, you're like, I'm going to finish this epic puzzle. And you start putting off everything else in your life just to go finish the puzzle because that's what you want to do, right? And that was kind of how I thought about wrestling. Almost everything else got pushed to the side because I was trying to solve this wrestling puzzle. And that was because I had a high sense of curiosity. So, it's okay, in the one sense as a coach, I feel like, shit, I need to do more repetition because my kids just aren't good at the basic skills. But in the other sense, it's number one, we're having good results. Number two, it's if curiosity is a main driver of motivation and what I'm trying to do is motivate them, then maybe I should be throwing all these new techniques at them and getting them curious about the sport so that they're thinking about the sport outside of the time they're at practice. So, Gene Zanetti, thank you for sending me this. I thought it was totally fascinating. Maybe I'm a nerd. Maybe I'm too much into sports psychology. But I think some of you nerds are also going to enjoy this. So, that's what I got. I hope you enjoyed the text captions above. I made this one a little more professional. I'm out. Peace.